everyone.
Hello,
Well-
hello.
Welcome back to the Dark Ages. So,
I said, is America great yet?
oh my God. Have we done it?
Did we do
Fuck.
it? It's 4 years. Isn't America
Oh.
great now?
Yeah, it's been 4 years. How's it looking? So, listen, obviously, Alyssa and I mentioned we bumped the episodes we were going to have planned for this because this is topical and important and urgent. And honestly, the only thing that either of us can think about or anyone should be thinking about, frankly. So where to begin? I know we have a bunch of stuff to say before we bring on our guest, but
Well, we can begin at Black Lives Matter and end at Black Lives Matter and
That.
demand justice and yeah, be better.
This is just a time. I don't even know. I should have scripted something out because there's so much to say. But honestly, like, I know that everybody is on various levels of experience dealing with these issues. And I want to acknowledge that, no, it doesn't matter if you've never thought about your white privilege before and you're just now having the realization that, holy shit, something's wrong. Being white has a privilege. If you're just realizing that, or if you've been fighting for this for years, you're all valid and need to be in this space, because the only way that change is going to happen when it comes to racial injustice is if white people are involved. The same way that women couldn't get the vote without men. Obviously, they weren't allowed to vote for their right to vote. So how did that need to happen? We needed to get men on board. Well, in this situation, the party of power is and always has been white people. That is me. That is a lot of you. And so don't you dare think that there is no place for you in this fight. And when people tell you to sit back and listen, understand that along with you do need to sit back and listen. And along with that, what you learn from listening, it is your responsibility to amplify. And this is do not just sit back and stay silent. No matter how informed you are, you continue to inform yourself. Alyssa and I put out a list of resources the other day. I mean, anything, books, articles, podcasts, movies, films, petitions, representatives to contact, literally everything.
Yep. Yeah. If you're not, like, I don't know. I just feel like me and Molly have been talking a lot, and we're just so disgusted, and like, who cares? Like, we're disgusted. We're not, imagine how actual Black people feel,
Right. So
when they're
everything
seeing
you feel
this.
right now. Yeah.
So it's like hard because it's like you're in your feelings about it, but it's just like, fuck my feelings, and you want to do something with it. And, we're able-bodied. And so we went to the protest, and like, it was amazing, and it was good to do something and be around people. We were very safe. And I encourage people to do that if you can.
Yeah. And I feel like, yeah, if you can. I know COVID is a thing, but here's the thing. People are protesting
Stay
from
in
their
your car. You
cars.
can stay
They're
in your
driving
car.
alongside the protest, or there are purely car actions, or there were people who you are at the protest, you're walking along with the protest, and you stand over 6 feet, you stand to the side of the line and you walk with them. Everyone's wearing a mask. The one we were at, no one was touching. Obviously, nothing got out of control at that one, but like, I know everyone has to make the best decision for themselves, but seriously, ask yourself, be really honest with yourself. And if you are afraid of putting your body there, what is this fight for? Oh, it's because Black people are afraid whenever their body is anywhere. Like, you're afraid to go get your body involved. Donations and petition signings are very important. I do not want to minimize that. Very important. And like I said, not everybody has to be doing the same things, but there's a lot of power in putting your body where your mouth is and where your money is, because it's bodies that are being threatened in all of this. And that's what this is about. And like I said, with the virus, I mean, you could be in your car. There were plenty of cars along the side when Alyssa and I were there. I also know there's a lot of actions. If you follow White People for Black Lives on Instagram, there's a lot of actions that are just car protest based. So, I mean, really, you don't even have to dive that deep into research to find ways if you don't feel like walking on the streets. But Man, it's important. It's so important. Like, how many times have we all seen footage from the 60s and movies from the civil rights movements in the
Yeah.
60s? And it's so easy to be like, wow, thank God, it's beautiful there are white people there. I'd be right there with them. This is that time. This is that. This is that. So when you have, who knows, if you don't have kids yet, if you do have kids, and we're, people in their 20s, 30s now, if you don't have kids yet, this is a point in history that is going to be forever marked. This is huge, and we can't see the full scale of it because we're in it right now, but we all know this is different than what has happened in our lifetimes. And I just imagine, like, if I have kids and then they read about this point in time, or they're seeing videos, and then
Hmm.
they ask, well, Mom, were
What did
you
you
there
do?
with them? What did
Yeah.
you do? Were you there? I'll be damned if I am not saying, yes, I was right there. I was doing
Right.
everything I could. And I know that looks different for everybody, but you should be
Yes.
asking
Yeah.
yourself the same questions. It
Like,
truly, like, I
yeah,
can't
am I
stress it
doing
enough.
enough? Yeah. I mean, it's a natural feeling to have. But there's a lot of resources out there. There's people you can talk to. There's friends that
Mm-hmm.
if you feel like they're doing a lot and be like, "Hey, what can I do?" There's no room for feeling like you can't do enough. There's
Yeah.
so much you can do on all levels, and heck,
Yeah.
even nurses and doctors are out there protesting because they know this is a
Right.
pandemic that only us can fix.
Mm-hmm.
And vote.
Yeah. I know. It's just this huge
We have
thing
to
of,
make sure we're voting.
I know that there's a lot of mixed emotions, and there's white guilt to sift through, and all of these things. And one thing I do want to say actually is I understand why this is happening. It's out of love. It's out of white people wanting to find ways to be involved and to express their concern. But reaching out to your Black friends' DMs and
Hmm.
simply saying, this makes me so sad, or even asking them, what can I do? Like, I say this with love because I know it comes from love when people do that, but it
Hmm.
is what that is doing is making Black people swim through more tears to get to where they're trying to go. And there are people, like Alyssa said, if you see friends of yours that are active, that are really active in it, doing it, going, message them, have the conversations. Not, I got to be clear, because I'm not saying don't have conversations about this with Black people. That's not what I mean. But if you're reaching out just to say how sad this all is, um,
They
just
can't solve your
they can't. They're
issues and
already,
be
if
there
you
for
feel
you.
the sadness and the hurt and the agony that we all feel is only amplified when you're Black. It's that much more. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is be conscious of what you are reaching out to say.
Hmm.
Because reaching out to say, I'm so sad, I can't believe this is happening. Um, I know that Kip has gotten a number of DMs, and a lot of this is so sad. I can't believe this is happening. This is my anxiety is getting too high. I need to check out of social media for a while. These things, um, this is the time. My anxiety. Alyssa and I are both like, my anxiety's through the roof. I
Hmm.
am I'm crying out of nowhere. My blood is boiling. I am angry. I cannot do anything unrelated. I can't read a book unrelated to this. I can't have a
Hmm.
conversation unrelated to this.
I know.
I'm not able to. And so, yeah, everybody's anxiety is high right now. That's what happens when there's civil unrest. And that doesn't mean run away from it. And it doesn't
Yeah.
mean tell your Black friends how hard it is for you and that you might need to step away, because just please don't do that. Please don't do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. No. Yeah, you can't project onto it. It I- it's hard because it's like you want to reach out, but it's like
I
you have to
know.
figure out the right thing to say. I mean, it's not like it's
Mm-hmm.
that hard.
Right.
Um, I mean, it's interesting. It's like you want people that haven't devoted time to this cause or devoted time and energy into learning about racism and what it
Mm-hmm.
looks like today. You know,
Mhm.
you want them to stay educated. You want them to reach out to the right people. But like in a time of
Right.
pain right now, you have to be wary about who and what you're saying.
Yeah, and there's definitely a way to I think it's important to reach out to as a white person, you have black people that you're close to. It's not a time to stay silent either. I understand this is tricky. So I really want to emphasize I'm not saying don't reach out to them. I just
Yeah.
mean like really be conscious of what you're saying and put yourself in their shoes and
Hmm.
as much as you can. And it's a thing of like, look, if
I mean, that's a really
I don't
big
know, I
reason
think
why
the
we have the guest we have today, because we didn't want to just, go
mm-hmm,
to a black person and just be like, hey, answer all our questions right now
yeah,
about race and make us feel better, you know?
right, because
We
it's
wanted to be
not
conscious about it.
yeah, and it's not black people's obligation to teach white people about race.
Yeah.
It's our responsibility to educate ourselves as well, and so that we can work in tandem with them and not running up to them like, "What do I do? Tell me what to do. Tell me what to do." Because I mean, man, we'll share a lot of resources. Like I said, the White People for Black Lives Instagram is a great resource. Dahlia, our guest for this episode, is the co-founder of that organization.
And how
Um,
long have you been a part of?
Me, 2 years. So today's guest, we have anti-racist organizer and co-founder of White People for Black Lives, which on Instagram is at WP4BL. They're also the co-host of the podcast entitled Bold Conversations About Race.
Check it
We
out.
have Dahlia, what?
Check it out.
Oh yeah, check it out, please. We have Dahlia Ferlito. Their Instagram is at DAHLIASEED, Dahlia Seed. So after this conversation, I know you're definitely gonna want to know more about them. So please go to Instagram, check them out. They're always posting extremely relevant content, resources for white people in particular. So,
Here it is. Enjoy.
all right, welcome Dahlia to the pod. Hello.
Thank you so much for being here.
It's great. It's my pleasure to be here with y'all.
I'm really grateful to you for taking the time for this because I know you're incredibly involved. Every minute of your day, especially in these times right now, is probably booked up. And so, Alyssa and I just really wanted to like really bring to the forefront to our audience. We don't know where, as far as our listeners go, where everybody is in this in terms of we might be talking to, as you coined the term, which I love, emerging activists,
Yes,
all the
yeah.
way to people who have been involved for years. So I want to keep that in mind. That's why some of the questions I'll be asking you, I'm sure, are pretty basic, but I just want everybody to find an in, like find a way to involve themselves in this.
Yeah.
And so I know a little bit about your story, but I kind of wanted to hear from you, your
Yeah.
upbringing and what brought you to this work and what brought you to co-founding White People for Black Lives.
Sure, yeah. So I grew up, I've been living in Los Angeles for 17 years, but I grew up on the kind of like a small city that borders Boston called Everett. So you will actually also
Oh.
hear my Boston accent slip in every once in a while. So warn your audience. I do pack a
Pocketha.
Harvard, yeah. It comes out. There's some words I just can't.
Yeah.
Anyways, so I grew up in a pretty like relatively sort of like a working class community that was diverse on its face, in terms of like the composition of folks who lived there. But in my school experience, there was a lot of like intra-school segregation. So and I didn't even know it. I didn't see it until reflecting back after doing this anti-racist work and looking at pictures and wow, like all my
Yeah.
closest friends were white, and like seeing how that played out and really thinking about what that experience was like and seeing some racialized fighting happening, but no language, didn't really understand what was going on. And in my household, which is typical for many like white households, was like the good thing to do if you're a good white person is to not talk about race, right? So
Right.
there wasn't like any dialogue in my household to think critically about what was going on around me, but there was experiences that I had of like particularly my male figures in my household, my father, stepfather, that would be overtly racist, and I knew in some ways to be like, that's not okay, you can't say that, but I didn't really know anything else. And so I
Yeah.
kind of there wasn't much happening on that front. What was really happening for me was my experience as a person who grew up working class and seeing the struggles that my mom had when we were, children growing up in the 80s, and she was a single mom working as a waitress making $2 an hour at kind of like a diner kind of thing, and what that was like, and having a lot of questions for why she was struggling so much, yet it seemed like other people weren't. And so really wanting to connect the dots around that experience for myself, again, minus like the analysis around race. But it led me to an analysis around capitalism. So I kind of
Oh,
was like, I'm
wow.
a socialist, and
Right.
getting
Yeah.
into college and really like identifying, reading like Marx and whatever, and just feeling like, oh, like really hanging on to that of like capitalism is kind of like the root of all evil and all oppression, and we need to
Yeah.
redistribute wealth. And so for all intents and purposes, I was like a well-meaning white person, a white liberal. Probably would have been a Bernie supporter if Bernie was a thing back in the early 2000s. And I was working in nonprofits and working in spaces with communities of color with like absolutely no analysis, and making so many mistakes that like I look back after I began to build my anti-racist toolkit and could like identify certain things that I did that were super harmful, but I had no idea at the time. And so
Mm.
when Prop 8 happened, and if y'all were in California in 2008, there was, it was kind of a whirlwind political moment where folks were taking it to the streets and like really like rejecting the Yes on 8 campaign. And there was a lot of LGBTQ folks that were like unified against the Yes on 8 campaign, and like really going for like supporting marriage equality and really rallying around that. And so I began organizing in a small collective with basically folks who are just my friends and like coworkers, and going to all the protests after work and things, and seeing that like at that time it was a very like sort of white male, like white gay male experience, and there was a lot of white gay men sort of at the helm of that. So we began having conversations about what was missing, and so we began to organize with young people, with young people of color specifically. And I was the only white person in this small collective. And one day I got a text from somebody who was my friend, and the text said, "Have Whitey do it." And I was perplexed. I honestly, I didn't know what to make of this text. And this was, again, back in 2008. So I just was not in a space of looking for racial analysis because I didn't think I needed one. I didn't really know anything. I didn't know what to access until I get this text. And so I said to my friend, I was like, what, like, kind of like, what's up? Like, what is this? Was this meant for me? Like, what's this about? And then she's like, I think you and I have to talk. And so I was, again, completely confused. And
Yeah.
What?
then we met up and we began to talk about all the ways that my behavior was harmful in the organizing that we were doing. And she was like listing all of these different things about the ways that I was taking up too much space, the ways that I was kind of at the forefront of our collective and getting all of this attention for collective work. And all of these things that, like, for me as a white person, were behaviors that always positively reinforced. And I thought I was doing good, and I was like, digging in and doing the work, but I was just taking up so much space that it was actually hurting people that I cared about. And so she's telling me all this, and then she says, "And I think it's because of your white privilege." And then cue meltdown. And so that's when because I just didn't, I was like, privilege as a working class person, as white person, we equate privilege with wealth, like wealth privilege, class privilege. And I was just like, but I struggled and I did all these. So I just like lots of defense. Like it was the textbook white way of responding to being called out for having white privilege. And that was me all over it with my friend. But luckily this friend and people in my group like basically said to me, like, we care about you and we value you, and I'm committed to making you an anti-racist white person. And they stuck with me, and we went through some really bad restorative justice processes. Now that I know what restorative justice is supposed to be, like, it wasn't that, and it was really hard. But we really tried. We were really committed to staying in relationship to one another. And so that friend turned me on to the Alliance of White Anti-Racists Everywhere, who were like, they were holding this institute. And at that point, it was the first time, it was back in July 2009, and it was the Unmasking Whiteness Institute. And my friend happened to be in classes with somebody who was working, was like kind of volunteering with Aware at the time. and like just gave my friend this like flyer, and it said unmasking whiteness and all of these things about racial identity and anti-racism and all this stuff. And I just looked at it and I was like, I think I need to go to this. And so
Yeah.
I went for 4.5 days, got my ass handed to me, learned all of these different things around ways in which white people
Yeah.
like are, you know, being embedded in white supremacy culture and institutional racism and guilt and shame and sort of all of these elements. And then at the end of that experience, I felt really I felt even more confused, I'll be honest. Like, I felt really confused. I didn't really know. I was just so afraid of like fucking up again that like I did nothing. Like I was just like, I didn't know what to do. I was just like silent in every space. Like I was just so scared. And so then, you know, fast forward a few years later, and it was 2014. And at that point, I still like continued organizing with those folks, and then I was going to the Aware LA Saturday dialogues, and so I was still doing that, and I was doing a lot of internal work, and I was reading a lot of books, and it was like all in my head. And then when I was seeing the uprisings relative to Trayvon Martin's death, or killing I should say, his murder, and relative eventually then to the Ferguson uprising, and you know, I just said to myself, I was just like, I'm witnessing like this iteration of a civil rights movement, and I can't allow my fear of making mistakes to like dictate my actions, because I'm so scared that I'm not going to do anything. And I like,
Right.
so I reached out to so a friend referred me to this call that Showing Up for Racial Justice National was doing in like the end of November in 2014. That was basically like a report back from Ferguson on the ground, and folks who are organizing with folks in Ferguson who were saying like, here are some right ways that white folks can show up in this movement moment for Black lives, because we were also getting a lot of messages that, hey, to the back white folks, like, this is, you know, not your movement. But those of us with like a consciousness were like, well, is there something that we can do? Like, what can we do? And so they gave us all these tangible ways in which white folks can step in. So there's like 500 of us on that call. And so I basically, like, after that call, I was just motivated to want to continue doing something. And so I reached out to my folks at Aware, Jason David, and some others. And I reached out to some other networks, and I basically just put a Facebook event page out into the world and had a meeting at my apartment. And I had 25 people show up on December 4th, 2014 to sit in my living room to try to figure this shit out. Wow. And we've been organizing together since. And now we're in, you know, kind of another moment. But that's the history.
And that's why people for Black Lives.
And yeah,
wow.
So that ended up being why people for Black Lives.
Basically 6 years old now, right?
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. And you know, it's so interesting when you talked about like the working class perspective, because that's how I, you know, when I'm trying to, or, you know, explore how the others kind of feel about this, the people that aren't, that don't get what's happening. They're just like, well, no, you know, it's like Blue Lives Matter or the All Lives Matter people. The people are like, no, you know, you go on Twitter, they're like, well, you know, they have to just pick them up from their bootstraps like I did. You know, I'm from a working class. So like, how do you kind of relate to them, because you had that experience too of just like not, I guess, yeah, not putting yourself, I don't know,
like
not
how to
making
have
yourself a victim.
conversations with the people who are saying that, and in a productive way.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, so when it comes to, so one thing that I'll talk a little bit about is a value that we hold, and that like Surge National holds, which is the value of mutual interest. And that like really at the end of the day, like when you look historically at even the reason why, you know, whiteness was created was to be able to divide the working class. So divide white people from Black folks, from Indigenous folks, and other people of color who actually had all of the same interests. And the power elites saw at the time, hundreds of years ago, the unity, and that folks were actually rebelling against the plantation owners, and it scared them. And so then they gave white folks a little bit of privilege here and there that eventually grew, and then separated us, right? And so when you look at that history, it's really like you have to have that class analysis. Like we need
Yeah.
that unity so that we can work together. So our mutual interest is like we got to work in multiracial coalitions to be able to improve the material conditions for all of us. And so of course we can get into like these back and forths around like why we don't say Blue Lives Matter, and we can do some of that education about why it is Black Lives Matter. And then we also have to say like, you know what? If Black people get freed, then we all get free, right? Like we have to look at who is suffering the most under these various types of oppressive systems, and then if we can help create a better experience, a better world for folks who are suffering the most, then that is going to actually trickle up and help everybody.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of some type of roadblock for white people somewhere along the road of navigating these issues is acknowledging that it doesn't matter your background. If you are white, you are a part of the problem. In the same way that if you're a man, you're a part of the problem when it comes to the patriarchy. It doesn't mean you have to agree with it, but
Right.
because you benefit from it. And I think that's a thing that I feel like some people get really involved in this work, and it's great. And they think that somewhere along the line, you absolve yourself of being a part of the problem if you educate yourself enough. But I think it has to really be acknowledged that no, you don't get away from that. You have to use the power that we do have, because obviously we're white. So it has to be applied in a different way. And I don't know, I've gotten frustrated at times where, I've had friends, not to my face, or I would have gone off probably, but say that my activism or my involvement in these groups, or even just my concern for these issues isn't my place because I'm white. That's not your place. That's not. And I don't know. Again, I don't know as far as our listeners. I'm trying to cover everything because I'm like, maybe people feel like that, like, oh, that's not my place. And everybody is saying this is a time for listening, and that is true. But I think people also are confusing that with being silent. I need to be quiet and just listen. And how do you encourage people to come out of that way of thinking, I guess?
Well, I think you hit on several different perspectives of what can be happening for white folks like in this moment, which is like one, it's like fear of like making mistakes like I had, like, so like, hey, like I'm just gonna do what Black folks, Indigenous folks, people of color generally are telling me to do, so I'm just gonna listen. Then you're gonna like have folks who like want to distance themselves from our own whiteness, because to accept that we are white is to also accept this legacy and this like history that we sit in, and to accept that we actually do benefit from a system whether or not we like it, whether or not we want to. And then that means you have to accept that you have to do something about it if you want to live with integrity with yourself. So like we have a lot of like white folks who are like, I am a good person, and I said that in 2008. I'm a good person. Why are you telling me I'm not a good person? Because when somebody is saying to you that, hey, you might be racist, then we're going to be saying to ourselves like, well, that you're racists are bad, right? And if you're saying racists are bad, then you're saying that I'm bad and that I'm not a good person. And I think that like when it gets into that level of like personal, it feels like you're attacking me as a person. And instead of saying like, actually there's this institution that exists, we were all born into it, whether we like it or not, we benefit whether we like it or not, and we have an opportunity to do something different. So if we want to live with integrity, we want to live with ourselves, we want to be those white people that we think that we are, that are like good, very well intentioned, well meaning, well, there's a way to do that, and the way to do that is to work through creating an anti-racist identity, community, an anti-racist sense of self, like an like get into the world of anti-racist education and action, so that you can live with that alignment, so you don't have to be dictated by guilt and by shame. Because that's the other thing too, is like folks, guilt and shame are like really powerful. You're telling me I'm a bad person, you're telling me I did bad things, and now I'm just completely shut down and I don't really know what to do, and it's not really like sustainable. And so somebody, a colleague, a friend of mine, an amazing facilitator who's with AWARE and the Unmasking Whiteness Institute, and who's also an author, shout out, her name is Shelley Touchluck, and she made a book called Witnessing Whiteness. And she talked to me one time, I think it was in the first institute that I went to, where she was like, guilt is a good place to visit, but not to live. So we need to like turn that guilt feeling that we have, like, it's like, you know, I'm feeling really guilty because I have this privilege and I don't know what to do with it, and yada yada, and turn that into action, right? Like, you know, because we want long-term sustained movement for social justice, and we can only do that if we see what we have to gain and what we have to benefit from ending white supremacy, because we actually have a lot to gain. So if you look at even things like, you know, even with the health outcomes of white heterosexual men, and there's a book called Dying from Whiteness that talks about how white men are being affected, like health wise, mental health wise, how like white men's like are dying like at earlier times in their lives than they should be. And it's all because of these pressures that society has conditioned for white men to be this provider, to be this, to be the best, to be that. And when we have, you know, these capitalistic economic conditions that don't allow for white folks, white men particularly, to be able to live up to that ideal standard, then we're seeing a lot of violence. We're seeing a lot of interpersonal violence. We're seeing addiction. We're seeing depression. We're seeing high amounts of suicide. That is how white supremacy culture also hurts white people.
Absolutely. Like, just like you said, you know, like Black Lives Matter, it makes sense for everybody because we'll all matter as soon as we start with what, you know, with the problem right now. And what's interesting for me is like I have family members, and I'm part Puerto Rican. So like I have Puerto Rican family members and also friends of color that aren't Black, but also have problems seeing the issue, that have internalized racism, that I am having trouble with finding vocabulary to reach out to them because I'm immediately becoming impatient. I'm immediately becoming, this is so stupid. You're forgetting why our grandparents came here. And I get angry, and I just want to shut off instead of communicate. And I don't want to, this might be a lot of pressure for you to help me find the vocabulary, but like, you know, yeah, you know, they're not white people, but they have that fear, because I don't know what it is, and I think it is in the Latino community of just, you know, wanting to, I don't know, punch down. I don't know if you have any kind of advice for that.
So I will just like kind of begin with like there's not much that I can speak to the experience of people who are not white. I don't think that's like completely my place.
Yeah.
I do recognize that there's some overlap in that experience though that I think I can speak to from a perspective of being a white person, which is that anti-Blackness exists everywhere, right?
Yes,
And that
yeah.
we know that like the ways in which we need to overcome anti-Blackness is to, you know, participate in education, right? Part of like, you know, that's why there's a lot of workshops and undoing bias trainings and undoing racism trainings and things like that. And so there are ways in which that we can educate ourselves to really understand what's happening and how anti-Blackness was even created and how it was directly, you know, tied to the system of slavery and capitalism and so forth, and goes back so many generations. And then there is the piece of like the social hierarchy, right? And so that like Black folks are at the bottom of our social hierarchy, white folks are at the top, right? And so as a survival skill, just like white folks want to distance ourselves from whiteness so that like we don't have to appear to be complicit, you know, it is possible that like other groups are trying to
Do
you
that
know
as well. Yeah.
or not necessarily distance from whiteness, but like, you know, figure out ways that like we can, like folks can assimilate into whiteness as a way to survive, right? Like, and so, you know, I can't speak like a ton to that
Of course,
experience.
yeah.
But and that is how, you know, in some ways like that's part of the work that we have to do in terms of addressing anti-Blackness like everywhere, and really, and that's why everybody has a responsibility in the Black Lives Matter movement, particularly white people, to be able to undermine anti-Blackness and really put an end to it, because it's actually just like, you know, based in absolutely nothing other than hundreds and hundreds of years of, you know, being told stereotypes.
based on nothing, and yet it
Literally.
affects literally everything and
Absolutely.
bleeds into everything. And what you were mentioning about how it also, white supremacy is detrimental to white people as well, and people don't understand that. And it made me think of something I heard. It was a podcast. Oh, it was a couple of years ago. I wish I remember, but they were talking about how a lot of the school shootings that have been happening, how they were, it's white boys. And why is this happening? The hosts are a black man and a white man. And so they have two perspectives. I think it's armchair activist
expert?
or something. Is an activist one. Anyway, what the host was saying, which I was like, I had never found the words for it, but he's like, look, what white boys, specifically white boys, are not, they do not receive in society is they don't build up resilience. The second that any kid of color is on the kindergarten or before, you realize certain things. They're starting to understand that there is a hierarchy, there's a place. When you're a girl on the I remember so young, like, I'm not supposed to be good at these things, or I'm not expected to. You learn these things along the way, and they seep in whether you think about it or not at a very young age. So, and not only that, but white men are not taught, not only are they not taught any of those things on the playground, but they're also told you deserve everything. You deserve the top. You should be at the top. You should have, the entitlement. You deserve these things. You should have these things. So then a lot of times, kind of a tangent, but also relevant, I feel like, because when those kids who are because the ones who normally are the shooters at those schools, they're white boys generally, and they're usually the outcasts that everybody thought was kind of weird. And it's those kids who are like, wait, I'm an outcast. This is not what the world has told me I'm supposed to be and have. This doesn't equate, and they don't have tools of resiliency. And I just found that really powerful, because it just speaks to what you were saying and where we are now, and what the detriment it has to white men and white people. And the same way that I try to tie it into other things that people do understand, like the patriarchy is detrimental to men as well. So how could white supremacy not be detrimental to white people if you need a reason to fight for it that's not for black people? You know what I mean? It's just so connected.
Yeah, it's absolutely connected. And I think that that also speaks to the disconnect that is created from this bootstrap culture, this very individualistic culture, which is, which is part of white supremacy culture. It's not about collective, right? It's not about having community. It's not about everybody looking, after each other's children and having deep connections outside of your immediate family. It's, you got to make it on your own, kid. And if not, it's your own individual failure. That is white supremacy culture. You couple that with a sense of entitlement. It's just a complete toxic mixture. And we've seen it, like you said, expressed on so many levels. And those are the young kids that we have white supremacists actively trying to recruit, because they've lost their way. They're completely disconnected from home, from friends, from wherever. And then you have these white supremacists, white nationalists, all these groups that are saying, hey, but you belong here. And the reason why you feel so disconnected is because of them, right? And they give language to an experience, even though it's not correct. But they meet that they kind of fill that void for people. And so for us as organizers, as anti-racist organizers, it's our task to figure out strategies so that we can counter organize that, because that's what we're up against, right? And so we need to figure out ways that we can call more white people in to the side of justice, to the side of equity, to the side of a better world for all of us. And because when we talk about some of this is also tied to scarcity, I'm not gonna if I give you some, then I'm not gonna have enough for me. All white supremacy culture interwoven with capitalism, right? This it thrives off a shortage. And so part of our organizing again gets back to getting folks to realize that we have a bigger stake, and that there is abundance, that there is enough of it for us all to be taken care of, and that we have to work together to be able to transform these systems so that they're not just everything is concentrated in the hands of a small group of people at the top and leaving the rest of us suffer.
Go ahead, Alyssa.
No, I was going to say, I'm actually interested in, in your work with White People for Black Lives. Have you run into a situation where you've had have you had an experience with a past white supremacist, like someone who said they're a white supremacist and kind of
We did an
released.
event like last year, and we connected to a person who was a former white supremacist, and
Mm-hmm.
who through a program called so I don't know if you know Richie Rosita. He's part of Initiate Justice, and he was a co-founder of Initiate Justice in a program called Success Stories, which you can check out. There's a documentary that talks about success stories, and it's an anti-patriarchy curriculum that was developed by people who are incarcerated to specifically for men, using like foundational texts of Audre Lorde and other you know black feminists and other feminists of color and
Wow.
so forth. And through that experience, he was actually able to build more connections and build community, and that was part of the ways he, not all of it, but he said that was like part of the way that he was able to overcome some of the what had been deeply ingrained racism, because he was able to see that that like he was, essentially, like, when I obviously I can't speak to racists, but like they're looking for somebody to blame for their pain
Mm-hmm.
ultimately. And so if we can figure out ways to misdirect where that blame goes so that's actually going to the appropriate places, which is like,
Right.
white cis hetero capitalist patriarchy,
Mm-hmm.
then yeah, so that's, we don't have a ton of experience with like reformed, so-called reformed white supremacists or
Yeah.
what have you, but we don't work directly with them. But there are groups that do that.
Yeah.
God bless them. And Trump just defunded one group of like millions of
Yeah.
dollars that was doing that work. So
Wow. I didn't know that.
I think last year or 2 years ago, something like that.
Oh, well,
It,
that's interesting too, because you started this under Obama. How has it changed with the different presidencies?
Well, where do we begin?
well,
I
settle
know
in,
that's
kids.
loaded, but like,
How long do we
yeah,
have?
nah, I know,
So
yeah,
I think, well, there's two ways in which this has changed. One, for lack of a better word, for the better, right?
yeah,
Where like more like when Trump got elected on a Tuesday, we had our general meeting that Sunday, like 4 days later or what have you. And we had 120 white people at our general meeting, activated, wanting to show up, finally realizing that racism existed and how I didn't even know, how did we get here, this, that, and the other. So Trump presidency, like in one way, served to activate many white people to engage in racial justice organizing and recognizing that there was a need in which to do so. Okay, great. What came along with that package was activation of what was so we have like overt expressions of racism, which exists and certainly existed and will never stop existing unless we continue what we're doing these days.
mm-hmm.
Mm.
But more latent forms of racism brought those to the surface and normalized racism in ways that we hadn't seen in a little bit of time, and then gave them a leader with power. And then so now all of a sudden they all feel like rightful and justified
Validated.
in,
Right.
in their
Mm-hmm.
racism. And so it activated anti-racist, but it certainly galvanized all, like, lots of racist organizing and white supremacist, white nationalist organizing, and gave
Yeah.
them a leg in which to stand on and to feel like it was okay to have those views,
Yeah.
which was also a little bit different because when Obama, when he was elected, we also saw an upsurge of racism because of course people felt like that something was being taken from them because we
Mm-hmm.
had a black president. And so with that uptick of racist violence, that was the outgrowth of showing up for Racial Justice National. There was a call for white folks to get off the sidelines and do something to organize ourselves across the country. And that was the birth of showing up for racial justice. And then
Mm-hmm.
with the Trump presidency, fast forward, it created another expansion, another growth of anti-racist or white anti-racist organizing specifically across the country in the Showing Up for Racial Justice network. So it's a push-pull, but and now it is, well, we're all sitting in it.
Right. Do you still
America's great
find?
now, right?
Right.
This is it.
I'm curious, Dahlia, what are some things that you still come up against, having put all of
Mm.
you've been so involved in this, like you said, for years, and constantly educating yourself and being involved, do you still come up against things within yourself that you have to check yourself in terms of any, like, white? Of course, we still have privilege. It's not like that goes away, but some things that
Yeah.
you catch yourself thinking or doing where you're like, whoa, even still.
Yeah, I mean, I think that racism is pervasive and it's deep rooted in our bones, and many people feel like you can't even educate yourself out of it, right? Like that it's very limited. Like you can only read so many
Yeah.
books or have so many workshops, but like it's the air that we breathe, it's the water that you swim in, it's just there. And so one thing that we always say, particularly at the end of the Unmasking Whiteness workshop, where people have sat in a room talking about racism and white supremacy and white privilege for 4.5 days, you don't just like do something and get your good white person or your anti-racist certificate at the end and say, okay, I've done the work. So it is like a lifelong commitment. It's a lifelong process of undoing and recognizing. So you just get better at recognizing when it like kind of peaks up and like, oh, that's something going on there, let me check myself, kind of thing. I would say like one thing for me is trying to be right sized. So like I think some of the things, particularly in activist spaces, but of course in workspaces everywhere where there's a lot of white people, is white people taking up like a shit ton of space, like all the air, all like my opinion is the right opinion. You all have to listen to me, blah, blah, blah. And that can create a lot of frustrations with folks who are not white because they can't like engage. And then a lot of that type of way of engaging is like I mentioned earlier, is just like reinforced. Like this is the way that you're supposed to be if you want to get ahead or what have you. And so it's so easy for us to come into spaces like we're the boss and then have people look at us like we are the boss, right? Default to whiteness, all knowing. And then like, so, but then once you get a critical consciousness and, start to think about it, then it can, like I mentioned my experience before, which is like complete silence. And so for me, when I walk into spaces, like I try to be conscientious of paying attention to the dynamics of the room. And that's something I don't think white people do enough generally, which is like, if you're on a call, if you're in a meeting, like paying attention, like are people with the most marginalized identities speaking first, giving people like a beat to be able to respond, so it's not just like, hey, me, like really taking a breath after a question or somebody is speaking and allowing for other people to be able to speak first, and then offering an opinion if it's warranted or whatever desired. And that's a way that like for me, like I'm constantly like I cannot get it out of my head, I anytime I'm in a space, like I'm just like always like trying to like get that balance and like really pay attention.
And that's interesting because that makes me think of the black box trend that just happened, with everybody. And what I think about that is, you know, me, because I am white, like I have those privileges of being white passing at least. And so for me, I can speak for me, where it's like I don't want to take up all that space, but I want to use that privilege. And we are in a pandemic where social media is the way we are communicating that. So I feel like I need to be loud. I need to be as loud as possible. So is there a way like you can be loud, but also, like you said, kind of read the room, but via social media, not to be the loudest, but to listen, but to also use your privilege? I feel like that balance is so hard.
It is, and that's a formula everybody's asking about. I wish I had
Yeah.
like the like magic bullet for y'all,
Right,
but
right.
it's really hard. Like, and I run that risk too of like not wanting to appear to be like the good white person, and like I'm gonna like check all these bad white people, and like I'm gonna be distancing myself and look at how cool I am or how down I am with my language, and I know all the big words, and you don't, because especially with like social media, like influencer culture, it just can become this like real kind of like toxic, like how down are you space, so that like and it can be really hard to engage. For me, like I just like, again, it goes back to like reading the virtual room. Like I think about what I'm posting, who's my audience, am I calling people in, am I like making sure I'm using language that's saying, hey, like this is my personal experience, like check this out, here's a resource I found beneficial if you might too, like versus like, oh, hey, you white people, and then like using language that like is common in like people of color and black spaces to like talk about white people, and using that
Right.
sort of distancing from whiteness kind of thing, and that sort
Yeah.
of, and so for me, like I just like really pay attention to the language that I use, that it's aligned with my value of calling people into this work and not calling people out for not doing it correctly. And then also, am I using my platform to like, amplify the voices of leaders
That's what I
who
was
are
gonna say.
Black
Yeah.
and Indigenous and people of color, and their experiences and their, you know, their analyses and that kind of stuff. And that, like, for me, like, I make sure that, like, for my audience on the social media, my small audience on social media of, like, like, of white folks that might be looking for ways to get involved, like, I'm just make myself accessible. Like, like, hit me up, DM me, like, shoot me a message, like, I'm here, like,
Yeah.
that's, kind of thing, versus, like, I'm the good white person sitting up here, you bad white
Yeah.
people.
Well,
But
and
yeah.
what you were saying of, because social media is unique in that when you're in person with people, I can't go and voice the opinion of people of color because I am white. However, social media, we have the opportunity to share, obviously credit and share other people's stories. So you can be super loud and have like be a vessel for people of color's stories and realities and truths as well. Of course, as long as they're credited in the post and you're not just like stealing their language and putting it up, which is a thing. But yeah, I know it's a whole thing to navigate. Before I know you have to go soon, Dahlia, and we always ask our guests at the end. You might have already actually mentioned it but we ask them in their SOS moment, being like a moment in life where you just like change course and like slap you in the face. Maybe it was what you mentioned before. Maybe you have a different one too.
Yeah, that I will say, like, I was cruising along at the age of 28 thinking like, hey, I'm 28. I'm almost 30. Like, maybe I've done my growth on myself kind of thing. And I was like, what do they call that? Like a Venus's return or Saturn's return or
Saturn.
whatever. Yeah. So it's just sort of like, that's the exact opposite of what's supposed to happen in those years. So my Saturn's return was like, being told that like I was not living according to my values in ways that I thought I was. And so when I got called out, well, I got called in, I will say, when I got called in by people that cared about me, and said that I had white privilege, like that 100%, like I still talk about that now. Me and those folks, like, we're at a place over 10 years later where all the healing has been done, where we still talk about that, and now it's like almost like a joke, like we're like, oh, remember that text thing, huh? But it was like my life was twisted upside down for like years from that, and I had so much learning to do, and I'm so grateful to the folks that helped me at that time. And I'm so grateful that I had, that I was living in Los Angeles, and like I actually had like the alliance of white anti-racists everywhere to just like kind of jump into because they were there, and I wasn't in some other place in California or in the country or in the world that didn't have access to that space. So I was completely fortunate and privileged to have that. But yeah, that was certainly one of my bigger SOS moments.
And do you think like it wasn't a called in moment and it was a called out moment, would you still have had the same effect on you?
It's hard to know, like, because I was so defensive with even being called in. Like, we were sitting at a park, and she was telling me in the most gentlest ways that, like, what was going on, and I still was like, So I can really imagine if I was called out, the amount of defense. And luckily, social media wasn't, like, a big thing at that point. So, like, I can only imagine. Like, I don't know how effective call-outs work. Like, I know that they can be cathartic for people who give the call-outs, right? Like, because, like, people just sometimes need to be like a fuck you, like, and you need to get that off your chest. And so be all, like, do it. Like,
I'm in that moment right now.
Absolutely.
I'm so glad you brought that up because Alyssa and I were on the phone this morning just today talking about, like, I just wanted some people and people that I love. That's the hardest part. I just want to shake and call them out. But it's like,
I made an uh-oh moment on my story. And I don't know. I'm just like, I want to call out my friends and family that are being so silent. And I know they're a little bit racist, and a little bit racist is still racist. And they're not doing anything. And it makes me so frustrated. And it's like, why are we silent right now?
It's super frustrating, blood boiling.
Yeah.
blood
And then
boiling.
it's yeah, totally. And like, so for me, I'm not going to like police people's calling out. You need the
Right.
catharsis. You
Yeah,
need to
I
do
know.
whatever you need to do.
but
But
still,
for
yeah.
me, like, like because I'm also like it's very easy. Like if I'm on the phone with like my mom or
Yep.
she says a little
Yep.
so like it's especially it's the people that you love the most.
I
Even
know.
Yeah. Right.
but then we think about like, okay, so it's certainly cathartic in the moment to get it out and like, talk about the facts, talk about the history, talk about whatever the experience and all that stuff. Absolutely. But then we have to like weigh that against like human, like how humans are and how humans just will receive information. So if like
Exactly.
humans don't receive information very well if we feel like there's a threat, right? And so like if we feel threatened, then like that's going to just like shut down the conversation, and it may not lead to the outcome that we want. And the outcome that we want is them to do better behavior change, better analysis, and so forth. So it ends up putting more labor on us as folks who want to like engage in these conversations and anti-racist work. It puts more labor on us to like stay in conversation and to do more listening and less talking, and really trying to get at like what's underneath the expressions of like racism and bigotry, whatever, homophobia, whatever you want to like name, but like staying in that relationship and continuing that conversation, and over a period of time and sometimes years for folks, and oftentimes unsuccessful, and sometimes we get the win, but like like I think that like that it's just really hard, and it's really really taxing. So you gotta weigh what you need to do with yourself.
Thank you.
Well,
I
we'll
know
see.
you have to head
TBD on
out,
how that turns out for my friend group and
but
family.
yeah, Dahlia, thank you, because to be able to amplify and have a conversation like this and put it
Yeah.
out there.
Yeah.
I mean, man, so many people, every little conversation that's had that can be put out on whatever platform people have, I believe
Yeah.
in. So thank you.
Totally.
Yeah, thank you
Can
so
I also
much.
just shout out something for your
Yes,
audience?
Please.
absolutely.
Because we just ended about talking about conversations. And so there's like a toolkit that you can get online. You just kind of download it, and it's called the White Ally Toolkit. And it's a way that you can like work through scenarios and like get some ways of like just staying in conversation that could be beneficial for listeners who are just starting to like engage in this for the first time, or even if you've been doing it for a while, to get grounded in different tools to use.
Perfect.
Amazing. Yeah,
we
thank
have
you
to
so
figure
much.
out a way to like link that. Yes, thank you so much, Dahlia. Thank you for sharing your story and everything.
For sure.
Amazing. Thank you.
Appreciate y'all. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much for listening, and thank you again to Dahlia for coming on and sharing your story. I hope everyone can take something from this. It's a really big conversation to have in such a small amount of time. But reach out to them when you have more questions. Reach out to us, Molly, if you're interested in also joining White People for Black Lives. But I mean, like, I'm still learning, and it's I can be as angry as I want, but I'm still learning myself. So it's a weird thing of like, I want to judge people, for not
Yeah, I
getting
know.
it, but it doesn't mean that like I get it 100%, because like Dahlia
Right.
said, like you'll never not stop learning.
Yeah, there's not a destination you get
It's
to.
a
Like,
marathon.
oh, I figured it out.
Right. So I don't know. It's a really hard space. And I mean, to get into it about our next guest, because he's an empathy coach, and I feel like he could also offer a lot of insight onto how
Yeah.
we can communicate and be better.
Yeah, I think that hopefully, I'm hoping that we'll be able to ask him a lot about when it comes to having these conversations with family and friends and loved ones who maybe aren't on the same page, and how to, have those conversations productively and not get fired up and angry, as is so easy to do.
Yep. But it's time for our charity nonprofit. And our shout out is obviously going to be Black Lives Matter. They were founded in 2013 in response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murder. Black Lives Matter Foundation, Inc. is a global, did I say murderer? Murder? is a global organization in the US, UK, and Canada. Their mission is to eradicate white supremacy and build local power to intervene in violence inflicted on Black communities by the state and vigilantes. BLM works for a world where Black lives are no longer systematically targeted for demise. It is a collective of liberators who believe in an inclusive and spacious movement to affirm Black humanity, Black contributions to the society, and Black resilience in the face of deadly oppression. To donate and learn more, please go to blacklivesmatter.com and click donate.
Yes. Something really easy that everybody can do right now. I don't care if it's $5, whatever. So for next week, we have our part 2 to this episode. We'll be talking with Tony Scruggs. He is an empathy coach, an activist, a public speaker, and the author of Excellence Off the Field. That title is because he is an ex-pro baseball player. So
I'm excited for that.
And yeah, with his public speaking, and so I met Tony at my first White People for Black Lives meeting. So he has a lot of experience and the tools to work with white people that are beginning this work, so to speak. And obviously he has the experience of being not white in this world, and he went to UCLA, so and on a sports team, and I'm sure he dealt with a lot of things when it regards race. And I'm curious to talk to him. I want to get. Thank you guys for listening. This is a 2-parter, very important to Alyssa and I, and I just really hope you guys listen and share. If you, like we said on our Instagram, we listed resources for action steps you can take now to educate yourself, or things you can physically do. But on Instagram at the, what?
No, I was gonna say, and as of right now, it's June 5th. All 4 officers that were involved in George Floyd's murder are now arrested and charged, but we still don't have Breonna Taylor's. Officers that killed her in her home. They're just on administrative leave. Okay.
Great.
There's no body cam footage of that, just so people know. It's so fucking shady how it went down. So please.
It was at night. Yeah. She was sleeping.
Yep.
She and her boyfriend were just asleep in her apartment.
Yeah. So there's still work to be done.
And also
always, but especially with this. So yeah.
In George Floyd's, those officers being arrested and charged, it is not a conviction. It's not over. So please.
And excuse me. Who knows if it will be
remember,
one.
Yeah, not to let up. This isn't, just like our education on this topic has no destination. You just have to keep doing it. The same with the fight for this. It's not like, oh, we got them. Okay, we can all go back to normal, because this is a deeper issue. So like Alyssa said, keep your finger on the pulse and keep informed and spreading whatever knowledge you gain. And as we all learn together, educate one another and ourselves.
So, thank you guys for listening. I think as Molly was saying before, we're at the SOS Pod. If you want to reach out, if you have anything to, share your feelings, share it with us. Totally cool. And yeah, here's turning meltdowns into magic.